Hello everyone and welcome back. I hope you guys are having another great Wednesday. I realize Christmas just passed us, bummer, but we still have New Year's to look forward to and a lot more videos coming out in the next year. So today, let's get right into our next lesson of orchestration. So you may remember a couple weeks ago, we went through sort of the very bare bone basics of a string section in an orchestra, went through some facts about the strings, some facts about the players, etc. Today, we're going to be looking at how we can use some of those instruments and how they produced sound with their players. Basically, we're going to be looking at some various articulations that are included and how they are used. We are going to break today's lesson up into basically two different groups. We're going to have part one of the video where we are going to be exploring some of the more common articulations that are found in sample libraries that you can purchase or that are online for free, and hopefully give you an idea of how these articulations are used so that you can have a better understanding of what you're getting when you're buying these libraries and how to better use them. In the second part, we're going to explain some different playing techniques and articulations that are not commonly found in any sort of string library that you can buy or can find free. And these are really only articulations that would be accessible to you if you're either a musician of the instrument yourself, or if you happen to have a budget big enough that you can actually afford to have an actual orchestra play these. Either way, I feel that knowing what these playing styles are will help you better understand music and help you write out better music for your instruments as well. It'll also make it easier to plan out how your string section will be orchestrated out in the future. In my personal opinion, if you want to be a professional when you're writing for strings, then you need to know what the professionals know and work with how they work. Even if some of those options aren't available to you at your given position in time or your given career, it is still important to know because it will strengthen your knowledge. Without further ado, let's get into some of the basic articulations that are extremely common, can be found in pretty much any library out there. And you'll also see in front of me here, I have a couple libraries up to help showcase these. I've got Metropolis Arc 1 from Orchestral Tools, and I've got Intimate Studio Strings from ATO. I'm going to be using these to help demonstrate some of these articulations as we go through and explain them. So let's start with the most basic of the basic, a standard sustain. Now, this is the most basic articulation you can find. It's produced when the player simply takes the bow of the string instrument and bows it across the strings and holds the note for as long as needed to produce what the composer or orchestrator wrote out for the sheet. The classic sound you think of when you think of a string instrument. It also has an extremely large list of variations such as multiple vibrato options, different options on where it can be played physically on the instrument strings themselves, as well as just different bowing options and techniques that will allow for different styles of sounds. However, the majority of these aren't included in most libraries, so we're going to be focusing on just the classic sustain sound. And most libraries will also only include a few vibrato options to help increase the emotional value that they can put onto these strings, while also keeping the budget of the library's production down and offering as much options as possible. Of course, if you're curious about learning about different styles of sustains and vibratos, there's always Google. I highly recommend doing your own research, as there are dozens of options for both vibrato and sustain techniques, and I just wouldn't have the time to explain it all in one video. Now, of course, this is just the classic string sound. It sounds like this. And if we're looking to add in a little bit of vibrato, it can add a little bit of more of emotional detail to your strings. And in that case, it sounds like this. Moving on from this, you have the basic form of a short note, which is called staccato. This is, again, the basic short note example of what you get when you picture a short note on a violin or a viola or a cello, double bass, whatever. Basically, what the player will do is, instead of placing the bow and bowing back and forth, they will take the bow and apply an extra amount of pressure and play it a little bit faster up and down to create that sort of staccato movement. It packs a whole bunch of power into the note, and it does it in a very short amount of time. So if you need short note articulations, that's how they produce it. is they take the bow and they just apply more power into the stroke, and they go up and down. There are, of course, other options for producing short notes, which we will get into in a moment, but this particular one delivers a lot of power, and it's very good for writing out ostinato patterns and writing out some fast and powerful runs. And as always, it's very basic. It just sounds like this. Forgive my horrible playing. I'm not a pianist. Now, if you're looking to produce a short note with different characteristics, you have a few other options that are typically included in a string library. You have pizzicato, you have spiccato, you have marcato, and you have collegno. Marcato is actually extremely similar to your classic staccato sound, except it has a lot more sustain to it. The attack of the note is much faster than a regular sustain note. However, the player is still putting a whole bunch of pressure on the note and holding it for as long as their bow will allow, and it creates a much longer note than would normally be found on just your classic staccato. As you can hear, the note's held out for a bit longer and it has that extra sustain while still packing that power. Now you also have spiccato, which is an extremely fast short note. It's much faster than staccato, and it's produced in a different way. Basically what they're doing when they're performing spiccato is they're actually just bouncing the bow on the string to create that short note. They're just tapping it on while they're bowing. So it's very, very fast. It is extremely useful if you're in a particularly fast section and your staccato isn't just keeping up to the pace that you need. Staccato is very powerful, but if you're working in 16th or 32nd note divisions, sometimes staccato doesn't keep up on those faster tempos. So you need to have an option available that gets that attack in there, keeps the notes on time. And that's where spiccato comes in. And we're going to take a moment to introduce you all to collegno, something that even if you're getting into starting to write strings, you might not be aware of. Collegno is a specific type of short note articulation that's really more of a form of percussion. The player will take the bow and they'll take the wooden part of it, they'll flip it and strike it against the strings on the instruments, or use the wood to bow the strings themselves. And when they're bowing the strings, that's called collegno tratto, and when they're striking the strings with the wood, that's called collegno battuto. I'm not Italian or whatever language those are written in, so excuse me if I butcher how those words are pronounced. This can be extremely powerful in your lower instruments, such as the cello or bass. It creates such a large percussive hit, and it also gives you a little bit of the tonality of the note itself. It can be great if you're looking to add tension or add in a new percussive sound to your particular passage. It's also very interesting to listen to on the high note instruments. One articulation I also almost forgot to include while we were doing this is pizzicato. Now, pizzicato is a very, very playful and carefree articulation that is produced when the player will actually pluck the string with their finger, sort of similar to how they will pluck a guitar string when playing guitar. It's very playful, very bouncy. It's used in a lot of comedic music and a lot of children's music. It's very lighthearted. And finally, you have jet, G-E-T-E. It's actually a form of spiccato, really, when it's broken down, but it's how it's produced that's actually a lot different. Basically, when it's produced, the musician will, instead of letting the bow bounce up completely, they'll keep applying a little bit of pressure so that the bow will bounce back down onto the string repeatedly. This will produce, in very rapid succession, 2 to 6 different notes in the span of just a few milliseconds, really. It can even be replicated on most spiccato patches, but some libraries will actually include their own jet articulations that have their own very unique characteristic. Now, if you're writing this articulation out, you want to keep in mind that it's actually extremely hard to play if you're looking to produce 4, 5, or 6 successive notes. Normally, this is only used to produce 2 or 3. However, it can produce up to 6 in solo settings or quartet settings. It's very difficult for it to still sound pronounced in a full symphony orchestra. And naturally, all libraries will include some form of legato. It is a crucial detail to add if you're looking to add all of that emotion that a string section carries. It's also in almost every comprehensive string library available on the market today. Legato is basically a fancy word to describe the transition between two notes. It can be an up or down slide to the next note, it can be a quick note change, or it can be an even more detailed and intricate style of transition. It's basically the transition between two notes, and a lot of libraries will have their own dedicated articulations for it. You can hear those little sort of pitch glides in between those notes there. That's a form of legato. Now there are also trills, which is the very repetitive playing of one note and the next highest note to that note together in extremely quick succession. Adds a lot of tension. It's very good for horror and other sort of suspenseful styles of music, as well as harmonics. Harmonics are really a form of sustained note where the player will play one note and then they'll touch a node on the string very, very lightly to produce more harmonics to the original sound. It makes it very, very ethereal in terms of tone. Another thing to keep in mind when looking at these libraries is something called consordino, or muted strings. Muted strings, or putting a mute on your strings, is something a lot of composers will do if they're working in a much softer section. They have a couple limitations because they need time to be placed and removed before that particular section is played. However, they excel at producing softer tones. Because the strings are muted, a lot of the aggressiveness or power of them is removed, and instead they become extremely gentle. This can be exceptional for slower sections, but it can really be implemented however you want. A lot of libraries on the market today will also include arcs or phrases or other options to help you and offer more flexibility. However, most of the articulations will fall into the same category or similar to categories to these different articulations listed previously. I highly recommend looking up a lot of the articulations available on your own, as I just can't cover all of them and all of the more unique ones in one video, and self-research is an important tool if you're looking to further your skills. Now, really quick, let's break down some techniques and playing styles and articulations that are not commonly found in really any string library on the market today. These are more unique, they're more niche, they produce very characteristic sounds. However, they're still good to know in the back of your head, because there may be a time in the future where you might want to use them, or if you're looking to produce a specific sound or further your knowledge, it's good information to have in your hands. I'm going to butcher some of these names for sure, so that's why I'm going to type them on the screen as well. First, we have flottando, which is actually where the player will play near the fingerboard instead of directly over the main body of the instrument. We also have sol ponticello, which is when you're playing very close to the bridge. These both produce very unique and characteristic sounds. Flottando will make it kind of ethereal and glass-like. Sol ponticello will add in some extra harmonics that can make it very tasteful. You also have sol tasto, which is when you're actually playing the bow directly over the fingerboard and accentuates more of that glass-like resonance in the strings. You have punta, which is when the player will play the notes near the tip of the bow. This produces a much softer sound than if they were to play it using the full range of the bow. They also have al talon, which is also called playing with the frog. The frog is otherwise called the base of the bow. It is the closest part of the bow to where the player will actually place their hand. Playing at the frog of the bow makes a much more aggressive and powerful sound. There are also dozens of other articulations that are more contemporary that modern composers and orchestrators will use to produce new sounds with these instruments, such as bowing the body, tapping the body, detuning the strings to tunings that are outside of the standard, and playing behind the bridge, playing with wide vibratos, playing the tailpiece. As music with these instruments has developed and grown over the years, so have the composer's creativity and the orchestrator's creativity as well. And they've come up with really any and every way that you can play these instruments and create new and unique characteristic textures. I hope you guys found this video useful today. I hope you are ready for next week, because we're going to be getting into examining each instrument in the string section in detail and getting down to how these instruments can really be played and used effectively in your compositions. But for now, I hope you guys have a great new year when it comes. I hope you had a great Christmas, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.